Most of the time when you see me painting, I'm using a set like this or like this. These are often referred to as tins of watercolor or watercolor pans. They include dried cakes of watercolor, but this is not the only format of watercolor. There's a ton. And in my book that's coming out this fall, by the way, you can pre-order this now. I still can't believe I can say that. Anyways, I did not use pans of watercolor paint. Instead, I selected a limited palette of tube paints for this. Doesn't mean you can't use pan paints with it, but I use tube paints intentionally for a couple reasons. The first reason is a practical one and a logistical one. Sets of watercolor like this are by different brands that aren't necessarily available internationally, including mine. But the book is available internationally, and I want to make sure that you can easily get supplies that are more similar to the ones I'm using. And the best way to make sure that the supplies are going to be available is to focus on the color names instead of the brand of watercolors that has all of the colors in it that I'll be using. I selected a limited number of colors that are used in the book, and these colors are ones that are widely available across a lot of brands, things like yellow ochre, vermilion, phthalo blue, and of course my favorite, quinacridone magenta. The second is that in this book we do a lot of color mixing, and in a lot of ways it's easier to achieve more saturated colors and mix up colors with tubes of watercolor. In case you're unfamiliar with how to use tubes of watercolor, what you're going to want to do is simply take the tube of watercolor. You're going to need some sort of a mixing well. Whatever ones you like. I like these ones that look kind of like little muffin tins. Then you just open up the tube and squeeze a little dollop and put it anywhere on your mixing well. Take your brush and wet it so that it's ready to go. And if you have a lot of water in your brush, you can touch right onto that little dollop and then grab that color and use it just as it is. Or if you want to mix up a larger amount of a color to cover a larger area and have it be a consistent color, you're going to start by spraying some water into this well, however much you're going to need to cover the entire thing. Then again, just tap your brush right onto that little dollop you just made, get some of the color in the bristles, and then swirl it around in that water. Extra little strips of paper are going to help you in knowing how dark your color is, because you're going to want to just repeat tapping on that and swirling that around into the color until you achieve the desired saturation that you want. If you want to modify this color to make it a custom color, just squeeze out a little bit more of a different color and then tap your brush onto that little bit of color and mix it in the well. Make sure you're spreading those bristles as you're mixing this in so that it really gets dispersed into the water. Just continue tapping on the colors that you want and mixing them in until you get the color that you want. The other option that you have with tube paints is you can actually turn them into pan paints. As a matter of fact, that's why I leave empty spaces in these sets of 18 watercolors that I sell, because I want this palette to be able to grow with you. As your watercolor journey progresses, you're more than likely going to start to pick up different tubes of paints or pans of color, and this gives you the option to include them in your main set so that you don't have to have multiple sets at the same time. In order to do this, you're just going to need an empty half pan of color. Click it into place, then take whatever color you want and you're just going to squeeze it in there. This is going to take a week or two to fully cure and dry, and if you want a full pan of it, you might have to refill it a time or two during the drying process. Speaking of the drying process, during this, sometimes it's going to crack or separate a little bit from the edges. That's totally normal. It happens with all sorts of different watercolors. It doesn't mean it's bad. As a matter of fact, you can still use it when it's cracked. It works just fine. If you really hate the cracking, you can mix in some honey or some glycerin into it, which can help reduce the amount of cracking, but it will alter the texture of the paint a bit, dilute it slightly, and it's going to increase the drying time. So in my opinion, if you can live with the look of cracking, just leave it. It's fine.